When we got Big Lad 6 years ago, he was what people often described as bomb-proof. He didn't spook at things, and he didn't really react much to his surroundings. He seemed steady, almost indifferent to what was happening around him. At first, we simply thought that he was laid back and calm, easy. But over time, we began to question whether this was actually calmness at all. About a year after he arrived, we had a visit from a hoof trimmer. As we talked about Big Lad, something clicked into place. What we had taken for calm began to look more like shutdown. Unlike Henry, our other horse, Big Lad showed very little curiosity. He didn't explore his surroundings like Henry did. He didn't really notice what was happening around him. And he lacked initiative. It was Henry who led him to the water trough and the hay. And at times, Big Lad would simply stop and stare vacantly into space, shuffling his feet. And if anything changed, he tended to freeze rather than respond. In his previous life, when he had been used for hunting, being bomb-proof would have been seen as an advantage. He was easy to manage, and he was deemed predictable and safe. But inside himself, he felt far from safe. He had learned to disconnect from his feelings and not feel very much. There were certain things, though, that did make Big Lad anxious. He was wary of people, especially men, and if something felt unfamiliar or potentially uncomfortable, he would retreat to the back of his stable, turn his head into the corner, and stand completely still. For such a big horse, he's 17.3, it was heartbreaking to see him trying to make himself invisible. Even ordinary things felt threatening to him, like if we happened to lift our arms near him, or if we wanted to comb his mane, or if we had a spray bottle in our hand. He didn't even want to be brushed. Over time, with consistency and patience, something began to change. He started to trust us. And as that trust grew, something else happened too. He started to notice things. Initially, this was sporadic. Sometimes a sound that he would once have ignored now caught his attention, or a movement in the environment caught his eye. Occasionally, a flicker of curiosity appeared, and sometimes fear too. For the first time, Big Lad began to spook. Sometimes it was just a small startle, but other times there was a bigger reaction. He was registering what was happening around him, like a horse who was beginning to sense the world again. On the surface, it looked like things were getting worse, but in reality, something very different was happening. Big Lad was coming alive. It was as though his system was learning, almost from scratch, what the world felt like. He was discovering sensory details, he was learning what sounds meant, and he was figuring out which changes were harmless and which required caution. He was remapping his relationship with the world. And that process wasn't smooth. There was a period of unfamiliarity, both for him and for us, as he was learning this new way of being. He needed to learn how to relate to the fear that he now felt, this fear that stemmed from unfamiliarity. Watching this, it struck me how easily we misunderstand this phase. When we begin to change inwardly, whether through mindfulness or life circumstances or simply paying closer attention, we often expect things to feel calmer straight away. We expect things to become easier and more settled. But sometimes the opposite may happen first. When our sensory clarity increases, we notice more and we feel more. And when we come out of numbness, the world can feel louder. This process of reconnecting with ourselves can feel unsettling because things are no longer so familiar. This doesn't mean that something is wrong, it just signals that something is changing. Getting to know ourselves in this new way takes time. We may need to allow ourselves to have more space and be willing to let things take as long as they take. This makes me wonder how often we misread this phase and perhaps assume that increased sensitivity means regression, or perhaps we may conclude that we were better before because dealing with what comes with noticing more can feel uncomfortable. But what if feeling more doesn't mean that things are getting worse? What if it means that our system is learning again, recalibrating, reorienting, making sense of the world with new awareness? Big Lad didn't need to go back to being shut down in order to be safe. He just needed time. He needed familiarity. And he needed repeated experiences that taught his system what was okay. And slowly, that learning happened. Perhaps the same is true for us. Perhaps there are times when fear, reactivity, or uncertainty are not signs of failure, but signs that something frozen is thawing. What if, in those moments, we showed ourselves kindness and gave ourselves time to learn what this new way of sensing the world actually means?